Hey y'all, welcome or welcome back to The Darkness. My name is Kaiya. If this is your first time here, hello. Hello. Today we're going to be talking about Wormrot. This is a grindcore band from Singapore. I am so stoked to have this band on my channel, to finally talk about them. As many of my viewers and subscribers know, I've been really getting into gore grind and grindcore for the last few months. I've known about Wormrot for a while, and I don't really know why I waited so long to dive into them. I have the most gorgeous, coolest, best vinyl I have in my collection. Literally at the end of this video. How this video is going to be split up is basically I will be doing a mini band deep dive. I will be reviewing each album, and then towards the end I will be showing off that gorgeous vinyl, and so you can hop around and skip around and have timestamps and stuff like that. The other thing, just a quick disclaimer, I formally am apologizing right now if I butcher any of the names in this video. I do want you to know that I tried very hard to make sure that they were pronounced correctly, but if they're not totally 100% right, I apologize, but I did try. Okay, so without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into the deep dive. Wormrot is a grindcore band from Singapore that originally formed in 2007 after the founding members served 2 mandatory years of national service in Singapore's military. Although the band members were in the service together, they didn't really meet and begin working on anything until after they were relieved of duty. Throughout their musical career, Wormrot has released 4 full-length albums as well as a number of EPs and splits. The lineup for this band has changed over time, but the main members featured on the 4 albums we will be talking about today are Rashid and Arif Suraimi. Rashid, Wormrot's guitarist, mentions in an interview with Blow the Scene that Wormrot might be the only grindcore band coming out of Singapore that has made it this big in other countries. In this interview, Rashid was asked about his influences in the grindcore scene in Singapore, and this is what he had to say. "We were actually trying to do some death grind thing, but I couldn't meet the expectation. My guitar skills were kinda bad. So I played some punk riffs, Arif liked it. We tried some Phobia, Insect Warfare, Magruder Grind mishmash, and subsequently I added some Agents of Abhorrence, Pig Destroyer, Extortion, etc. Too many influences. But yeah, these are the main core bands we ripped from. As far as a grind scene in Singapore, I think we were lucky enough to have a scene in the first place. It's different here in Asia. You can't really earn, let alone make a living out of playing shows. The mindset of the masses here towards this kind of music is that these kids are just a nuisance. Instead, bars and pubs pick up musicians that can play the Cranberries and the Eagles because that is the kind of music that attracts money spenders. It is purely passion and inspiration that drives the kids here because they know that the chances of them making it big here are close to none. So we just play for the fun of it. If Singapore's music scene is this bad, and we've not even touched on our neighbors like Indonesia, you'll sometimes get 19 bands, even more, playing in one show just to fund the rent of the venue. There'll be 1 or 2 bands that'll be lucky to get spotted, Wormrot being one of them. We were and still are those kids. It missed all the label signing. We come back to Singapore being complete zeros. That's not to say we have bad bands though. We lack in numbers, yes, but we have quality bands like Pazora, This Is Atlantis, I Am David Sparkle, Absence of the Sacred, and so on. Personally, there is no punk scene in Singapore. There is just the scene. In 2007, Wormrot would independently release a demo called Demo Promo 2007, which would contain 9 tracks and run just under 8 minutes long. The following year, with the help of Legion Productions, the trio would release an EP called Dead, which included 14 tracks and come in at 12 minutes and 31 seconds. Also, I don't know about you, but this album cover reminds me so much of Dying Fetus's new album from 2023, Make Them Beg for Death. The band would release a split that same year with another grindcore outfit, Diseptic. These last 2 projects would be released under small production labels, mostly for the physical printing of CDs for promotion. Around this time, Wormrot began working on their debut full-length album, which they were going to call Abuse. Their current label during this time, Scrotum Just Records, was a small outfit out of Singapore with many local bands on their roster. It was becoming more difficult for the band to feel optimistic about this partnership as their masters were finished. They wanted to release their new album, but were met with disinterest as there were many other bands their label was focusing on instead. This would prompt Wormrot to go label shopping in 2009. Vocalist Arif had this to say about eventually signing to Earache Records that year. I'm personally still in shock that we are actually under Earache Records. We were looking for a label to release the new album as our ex-label was rather busy with releasing a ton of great bands at that moment, so we decided to get help from another. We approached a few labels but never thought of asking Earache, as it's rather impossible in our point of view to be in such a major label. I guess a few weeks later, Digby, the man himself, hit us up over on MySpace with the deal. And for those that are not familiar, Digby is the founder of Earache Records. I kept refreshing the page to see if it's actually real. I've been following Earache during the era of grind, so you can basically imagine how stoked I was, calling the rest of the band and delivering the great news like a high school girl. After signing with Earache Records, the label would reissue Wormrot's debut album in all formats in 2010. If you are wanting a physical copy of this debut prior to the Earache reissues, you can pick up an October 2009 vinyl release from TVG Records on Discogs. I was not able to find an Original Abuse CD from the local Singapore label, however, but that could change at any time. So going into this record, I was expecting more of that old school grindcore sound, similar to what you get with Napalm Death and old school Rotten Sound. That's exactly what you get with this album. This album is 23 songs, comes in at just about 22 minutes. It's very much a standard grindcore album. That being said, it does lean more towards like the hardcore elements. It's fun, it's aggressive, it's very high energy, it makes you want to rage. It flows very, very nicely, and I enjoy it. It's a quick, punchy listen, it gets to the point, it leaves nothing hanging, it takes no names, and that's what you want with a grindcore album, and that's what they deliver. My favorite tracks on this album are Good Times, Freedom to Act, I'm Drunk, Rich, Blasphemy My Booty, and Scum Infestation and Last Song, that's literally the last song on the album, is such a banger. Following the release of their debut, Wormrot would go on tour for a bit to help promote the new album. Immediately following a US tour, once the boys returned home, Wormrot started working on their second full-length album titled Dirge. Arif said, "It was hectic, hectic, hectic. We jammed out like 3 times a week in the rehearsal studio. And we don't have our own basement studio to practice. We have to book a room in a jamming studio and get everybody to meet there and grind it out. Some of us are busy with their jobs, which did not make things any easier for sure." When exploring the lyrical themes of this band, one thing rings true for each album. The lyrics are inspired by personal experiences from lead singer Arif, and this is no different from their second album, Dirge. Arif explains, "It's a great way to release your anger through albums. Not much on gore. You can say it's a combination of hatred and violence. Ideas and inspirations never end, as it happens quite frequently, especially when you are living on a small island with almost 99% of the population being pure assholes." On May 3rd, 2011, Dirge would be released as their first official album under Earache Records. Following the release of this album, Wormrot would go back on the road and find themselves part of a wholesome moment during a show in September of that same year. There's a famous picture now called the Grindcore Goat that's been floating around for several years, where there's a goat scene hanging around the front row at a small underground show. This show would actually be a farm and DIY venue space in Mauriac, France, where Wormrot performed on September 29th, 2011. A few years after this show, the photo would make headlines again because the goat, whose name was Piquette, had actually passed away after 10 years of age. The farmer who owned the goat, Flo, said that Piquette immediately started hanging out in the venue space once she began living on the farm. She says she thinks that Piquette enjoyed feeling the vibrations in her hooves since the barn floors were made of wood. According to this article from Metal Insider, Wormrot's manager said that Piquette was very tame and followed the grindcore band around like a dog. When it was Wormrot's turn to play, the goat suddenly went in front of the crowd and watched them play their whole set. She was just chilling around the corner when other bands were playing. This is an album that is absolutely stronger than their debut. Whatever Wormrot needed to fix and tighten up in Abuse, they achieved that within Dirge. So Abuse had a lot more hardcore elements, whereas Dirge focuses more on this like death metal, thrash metal sound while also being able to keep the intensity up. The production on this album is significantly better than what was on Abuse as well. It sounds more balanced and it's mixed and mastered very well. You can hear all of the instruments and the vocals separately but together, if that makes sense. There's also a really great nod to Napalm Death on this album with their song You Suffer But Why Is It My Problem. It goes, I don't want to hear this again. You suffer but why is it my problem? And that's the song. The second to last track, A Dead Issue, is slow and groovy. It reminds me so much of Obituary. I absolutely love it, especially because it preps you for the last song, which is called The Final Insult. And this last track is a completely instrumental track and it's so good and it's a great way to end your record. I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. The musicians of Wormrot would begin working on song ideas for their third studio album, Voices, while on tour for Dirge. But for the musicians of Wormrot, they were beginning to feel extreme burnout and exhaustion from months and months of touring and studio work. Wanting to keep the momentum going so as to not disappoint their fans with this next album, discussions began for the band to take a small hiatus once they were done touring their new album. About a year later, on July 18th, 2012, just one day after returning home from a European tour, Wormrot would announce on Facebook that they were taking a break from touring after trying to debunk rumors that the band was disbanding. The band reiterated that they were still working on new songs, just taking a break from life on the road. And so the band went on hiatus for a few years and weren't heard from very much during this time. In 2013, Wormrot would perform at Bay Beats Festival in Singapore and perform 5 new songs that would eventually make it onto their third album. A couple years later, on April 6, 2015, Rashid would make this announcement on Facebook about Wormrot's drummer Feetry. We're deeply saddened to announce that Feetry is not a part of Wormrot anymore. For the past couple of weeks, he has distanced himself from us and has remained uncontactable. We fear that he has gotten himself into something too deep. He's not comfortable to share with us. If any of his friends who are reading this have any news regarding Feetry, let him know that we're waiting for any kind of reply. Any. This isn't the first time we've had this sort of problem with him, and we aren't letting it happen again. And now our progress. Wormrot was ready to enter the studio for recording in June 2015. With a new album to be released in September 2015 under Earache Records. We had our sights on Australia, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, probably more, for our first major tour since 2012. Not anymore, because we're back to 2007. It's still not exactly clear what happened to Feetry. He had been a part of Wormrot since the first album, so this departure was not an easy decision for the remaining band members. Based on Metal Archives, he was working for a band a couple years later called Tools of the Trade in 2017, but that's the last he's been documented playing in a band. Wormrot would eventually move on and find their new drummer named Vijesh Gadivala. It is believed that around this time, Wormrot finally began putting together the tracks for their third studio album. Throughout this period, Wormrot would tease footage of their rehearsals to help maintain interest and hype while fans were waiting. There was a post featuring rehearsal footage on March 21st of 2016 with the following passage: "This will be the last footage for you guys before we head on to the studio for the new album. Crunch time." And so the band went into the studio just a few weeks later, and on October 14th, 2016, Voices was released on all formats by Earache Records. If you're curious, there are a few colors you can choose from for their vinyls. The first 2016 pressing, Earache released black vinyl and also a red opaque version. Personally, I really like the milky clear repress from 2023. It reminds me of a pearly white candy cane color. Just before the release of Voices, Wormrot did an interview with Transcending Obscurity where Arif was talking about the album and what it signified for him. He said, "Personally, every album is like a diary to me. Whatever happened during that particular time period, I'll chuck it in. There's quite a few happy unity songs off Abuse and Dirge. writing about the good times on tour, hilarious social issues and whatnot. The only thing I could say about Voices is that happiness is being brutally murdered with a butter knife. The hiatus affected how I wrote the lyrics. It's purely hateful words of regrets, revenge, and utmost negative could-have fantasies. Hence, I would advise everyone who got the album in hand to read the lyrics. So this is an album that is 20 songs and comes in at 26 minutes, and it is significantly longer than Dirge. You're getting almost 10 minutes more of content, and I would say this is definitely a more emotionally charged album. They're playing around a lot with these melodic death metal elements as well as black metal elements. I honestly got a lot of Barbados sound-wise with this album. There's a lot of anger and pain in the vocals and in the lyrics, and I really enjoyed it. I also enjoy that there's a song called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Grind, which is a nod to the movie with Jim Carrey. This is now the second artist that's referenced that movie, having Ariana Grande that just released Eternal Sunshine, and that's like a concept record that is also about that movie. So I'm like, I need to watch that movie. Must be really good. We're looking for something that's kind of like, you know, an emotional black metal sound, but you want it to be punchy and aggressive. Like, give Voices a try. It's a really good album. I think that they, again, improved on their sound with this album. I do think it's better than Dirge. Some people don't, but I think they honestly, they improved lyrically and emotionally, and I think that that's important. After the release of Voices, Wormrot would again end up going on tour non-stop to promote the album. Rashid had mentioned in an interview with 13 Years of Bandwagon, finding inspiration to write songs for Wormrot was difficult after putting so much of themselves into Voices. Hence why Rashid joined psychedelic stoner doom metal band Marijana as a side project to help fill the void of music, while Wormrot would go on yet another hiatus while searching for inspiration. When asked about the experimentation on their new album Hiss and how people were speculating that the record would be vastly different from the others in their discography, Rashid said when Arif was going to the studio for the first time in years to record vocals, he tore his vocal cords, but instead of stopping, he adapted and tried to carry on. It doesn't sound like what it used to before, but it sounded like something new, maybe a bit more black metal. On Vijesh's part, I just told him, dude, if you can add on some other percussion like Sepulturas or something else, that would be cool. But we didn't use 60% of it because, well, it was experimentation. For me, I was just playing with pedals. We dedicated a few minutes just recording some noise and trying to see if it could fit into any of these songs. That was the extent of the experimentation between all of us. Other than that, we also used violins, and we had Myra record violins to put in more textures. Personally, for me, the violin textures within this album are my absolute favorites. There's a video of their violinist recording her parts for the song Grieve. It's incredibly cool when you think about how this style of violin playing is effectively used in horror movies and on this record to trigger a sense of uneasiness within the listener. Check it out. The album artwork for Hiss is designed by artist John Chan and features a woman who resembles Japanese actress Meiko Kaji, which Rashid said he took inspiration from as he watched a lot of Japanese movies in his lifetime. Arif was the one who wanted something blue for the cover, and I really love what they came up with because it's very modern and eerie while also being quite simple and beautiful in its design. So now let's talk about the vinyl. This is a limited edition C-Pack that was released in May of 2024. The cover, as you can see, features a blue gel that moves around like water over the album cover. I've never seen something like this before, and honestly, it is one of the coolest vinyls we have in our collection. As of me doing research for this video, there is currently a copy up for resale on Discogs for $80 US. This could obviously change at any time. But this album is very modern and it's very experimental without sacrificing any of the elements that people love about Wormrot. The absolute transition in this album between this kind of like bright, thrashy, grindcore sound and this absolute turn of events to this creepy, like unsettling, dark sound towards the end is kind of a twist. It's very, very interesting how they play with the instrumentals. I mentioned how they did a lot of experimentation with this album, and you can really hear it, especially with the violins. Once those violins kick in with Grieve, woo, it really makes you feel like you're in a horror movie. So now that we've talked about the 4 albums and their discography, we have to talk about the current status of the band and what the future holds for them. In 2022, shortly after the release of Hiss, Arif would announce that he was leaving the band to focus on his family. At the time, Arif's wife was also Wormrot's manager, so she would end up leaving the band's team as well. There are other theories about why he chose to leave, one of which involved protecting his voice. As I mentioned before, Arif tore his vocal cords during the recording of Hiss and subsequently would need to reevaluate whether it was worth continuing to be a professional vocalist. As of 2024, the band still consists of guitarist Nirashid Rashid and drummer Vijesh Garibala, as well as a stand-in singer Gabriel Dubko from blackened death metal band Implore. Based on the timeline, it seems that Gabriel has been a stand-in singer for Wormrot's live performances for over a year, so I would assume that they would have him track vocals if and when they decide to record another album. In 2022, Hiss would go on to be on Rolling Stone magazine's top 15 best metal albums of the year, and even be talked about by major music reviewers around the globe. Personally, I feel like Wormrot is one of the more interesting grindcore acts that have come out recently. That's awesome because grindcore doesn't get the recognition it deserves. You know, it's definitely one of the more obscure subgenres that a lot of people, the masses, don't recognize. So I do think it's cool that they were able to get some recognition. What is your favorite album? What do you think about their most recent release, Hiss? What did you think about any of their records? Really, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, you guys.